Valentine's Day, our thoughts turn to hearts and roses and chocolate and attraction. We wonder about how to increase attraction. Well, our story starts way back in 1959. And that was when a chemical called bombicol was isolated by researchers from the female silkworm moth and was found to attract the male. And thus was born the concept of a pheromone, a substance that can stimulate some kind of behavior in a member of the same species. Well, insects, of course, are a long way from mammals and certainly a long way from humans, but it did introduce the notion that there might be some attractive chemicals. I mean, after all, we use the expression, people having the right chemistry. Is there really something to this? Well, back in 1970, the bandwagon started to roll along when Martha McClintock found that women who lived in close proximity, like in a dormitory, tended to have their menstrual cycles synchronized. That suggested some kind of chemical being released. Well, that study never was duplicated, but it did launch a variety of investigations, especially into the armpit. Why the armpit? Well, around puberty, that's when we produce some very unique scents. And puberty, of course, is when sexual maturity sets in. And it was also interesting that people noted that in old pictures, statues, etc., whenever ladies were asked to strike a sexy pose, they would raise an arm. So the question was, is there really something in the armpit of some sort of a chemical nature? And pretty soon, by 1991, a compound called androstenedione was isolated. And without really any further investigation, it started to be promoted as a human pheromone. Well, it turns out that there isn't any real evidence for that. And no one has shown that this really works, although there have been some studies in bars where people have anointed themselves with this substance and said that they were more attractive to members of the opposite sex. But again, these are studies that are not very, very compelling. However, in 2003, there was a study that came out that showed that male sweat actually was instrumental in stimulating the release of luteinizing hormone in women. And that's the hormone that triggers ovulation. And in 2011, another interesting experiment, when it was shown that women's tears had an effect on men. Well, I know that women's tears have an effect on men, but this was a very specific chemical effect which reduced testosterone levels in men and also apparently reduced their attraction towards women. Not necessarily something that is desirable. And this is where human pheromonal research stands. Of course, the fact that there is no evidence doesn't much matter to the promoters of various kinds of products. And these are certainly on the market, all kinds out there. You put them in perfume or in your aftershave and you put it on, and it is supposed to be attractive to the opposite sex. Of course, they don't mention that what you have here really is low the armpit, because that would not be very appealing. So where does this leave us? I don't think that we can place much emphasis on the pheromones. But I think that if you want to appeal to a member of the opposite sex and you want a little bit of social lubrication, I think that a nice flower, whatever color you like, I think will do the trick, especially if you give it together with a nice box of chocolates. And that should do the trick.
All you need is love, love, love is all you need.